Hi everyone, my name's Eleanor Hamblin and I'm the Education Manager at Benjamin Franklin House. I'm really delighted to welcome our Operations Manager, Caitlin Hoffman, who's going to be delivering this week's House Talk all about the life of Polly Hewson. So over to you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you to everybody who's joining us today, wherever you are in the world, from Texas and everywhere else. As Eleanor said, my name is Caitlin Hoffman, and I'm the Operations Manager at Benjamin Franklin House. And today I'll be talking about the life of Polly Hewson, or Polly Stephenson Hewson, an often overlooked figure in the life of Benjamin Franklin. Polly Stephenson Hewson was like a second daughter to Franklin and features in many of his correspondence, which you can easily access using the Franklin Papers. If you haven't already, I would very much recommend looking up the Franklin Papers online, as they are keyword searchable. So if you want to find out what Benjamin Franklin thought on any given topic, then I would definitely recommend you look that. And actually, I will apologize. This presentation is very quote heavy, and that's because I took most of the information from these letters that were sent between Benjamin Franklin and Polly Hewson, which were all accessible via the Franklin Papers. And in fact, if you are interested in getting more context, I would say, because I'm only going to be sharing certain quotes from the letters, so if you would like to see kind of the full conversations they had, they are available online, so please do have a look. So now we will, after I've done the warning at the beginning for the quotes, now I'll begin. So we start by looking at this portrait. It is sadly the only portrait we have of Polly and was made circa 1770. Given the dates, this may have been made around the time that she married Dr. William Hewson, maybe made as a gift to mark the occasion. It isn't marked in her will, but has clearly stayed in the family over the years, as apparent by the fact that it stayed in a personal collection from a direct descendant of Polly. So it stayed with the family at least. The fact that there is only one portrait of her illustrates how unknown she really is to most people, unless you are, of course, a Franklin scholar or interested in the life of Dr. William Hewson, or even just a Franklin fan. Now, not only was she like a second daughter to Franklin, her curiosity about science and the natural world is probably how we have so many detailed descriptions of Benjamin Franklin's perception of the natural world in very much layman terms. In fact, I would argue that if Polly had been born in the 20th century instead of the 18th, that she would have gone into a career in science or philosophy. In this presentation, I hope to illuminate the life of Polly Hewson using the letters written between herself and Benjamin Franklin, which reveal many things about Polly, but also the time period itself. But before we look at those letters in more detail, I think it's best we start from the beginning and talk a little bit more about Polly's life. So I'm going to start talking about her early life. Obviously, this is not a portrait of the Stephenson family, but I think it's a good depiction of what an 18th century portrait would have looked like. So just to get your mind into that space. So Polly Stephenson was born on the 15th of June, 1739 at St. Laurence Jewry, London, which is in the Guildhall area today. Now, we don't know much about Polly's life before she moved into Craven Street. What we do know is that she was the middle child of two siblings, Jane and Thomas, and her father had passed away sometime before 1757, leaving her mother, Margaret Stephenson, a sizable inheritance. We know that Margaret Stephenson, who would become Benjamin Franklin's landlady, bought the leasehold in 1748 and had converted the first floor into lodgers' rooms by the time Franklin arrived in London in 1757. She also invested in making the rooms look nice by replacing the sandstone fireplaces, for example, which you'll see right here. This is actually an image from one of our historic rooms at Benjamin Franklin House, and it's one of the two pieces of original marble from that time period. Sadly, 36 Craven Street was derelict for a couple of decades, and so we had squatters living in the house, and they took a lot of the original marble to sell on the black market. But this is one of the original pieces. And then Margaret Stephenson also invested in having ornate decorations on the staircase, like so. And again, this was to make the rooms look nice and probably more appealing to any potential lodgers like Benjamin Franklin. And all these things can be seen at Benjamin Franklin House today. So I do hope you come visit if you haven't already. So when Benjamin Franklin arrived in London in 1757, Polly would have been 18 years old. But it is truly through her letters with Franklin that we start to see what kind of person she really is. But before we continue down that path, it's important to note the time before Franklin and after Franklin. So I'm now going to speak a bit about how Franklin entering the scenes really changed the way that the way of her life, really. Now, Benjamin Franklin arrived in London in 1757 and was originally sent by the Pennsylvania Assembly to negotiate lower taxes for the colonies. What should have been a 5-month mission turned into a 16-year stay, where he only returned to Philadelphia once during this time. We know that when he arrived in London, a friend recommended that he stay with his acquaintance, Margaret Stephenson, who was letting some of her rooms. We also know that there was a dinner between Benjamin Franklin and Margaret Stephenson that acted as an interview for Franklin as a lodger. This was ultimately a successful experience, as he took the rooms right away. As a result, Margaret Stephenson became his London social wife and introduced him to her circle of friends. And it was quite a fruitful relationship that lasted during this time. And I think that Margaret Stephenson probably also enjoyed the fact that Benjamin Franklin had many men of learning come through the house to meet him. So it was more like a symbiotic relationship, and they both helped each other during this time. Now, Benjamin Franklin was very close to the Stephenson family and treated Polly like a second daughter, as I keep mentioning. His actual daughter, Sally, had stayed in Philadelphia with her mother, Deborah Franklin, and so he probably enjoyed being a part of a family. Benjamin Franklin once wrote that he felt like he was the head of a household, more than a lodger at this house on Craven Street. It is clear from his many letters to Polly over the course of his time in London that he thought very fondly of her. The tone is incredibly paternal, and many of his letters encourage her to read, study, and answer her questions about his experiments and scientific inventions. In 1770, though, things were about to change as Polly met her soon-to-be husband, Dr. William Hewson. Now, before I move on, I just want to say this is Craven Street today. This is Benjamin Franklin House right here, if you can see my cursor on the screen. The first floor are the lodgers' quarters, where Benjamin Franklin would have lived. And we think that Polly and Margaret would have lived on the floor above here. And if this had been a single family home, this would have been the formal dining room, but as it was turned into a lodging house, those were the lodgers' quarters. Dr. William Hewson was a young anatomist who would make a name for himself in the medical field. Polly met William Hewson and instantly fell in love, writing many letters to Benjamin Franklin about this budding romance. William soon proposed, and Polly wrote to Benjamin Franklin to ask whether she should accept his proposal in marriage, as he was the main father figure in her life. He responded, and this is where the quotes come in, so I do apologize. I am sure that you are a much better judge in this affair of your own than I can possibly be. My concern, equal to any father's, for your happiness makes me write this. I assure you that no objection has occurred to me. His person you see, his temper and his understanding you can judge of. His character, for anything I have ever heard, is unblemished. His profession, with that skill in it he is supposed to have, will be sufficient to support a family. I shall be confident whether you accept or refuse that you do right. I only wish that you may do what you will contribute to your happiness and, of course, to mine, being ever, my dear friend, yours most affectionately. Now, she did take his advice because she married William Hewson shortly after in June 1770. And Benjamin Franklin actually gave her away at the wedding, really cementing him as that really important father figure in her life. William Hewson then actually moved into the house on Craven Street and would set up an anatomy school in the garden after a disagreement with one of the Hunter brothers, who were other famous anatomists who had an anatomy school in Covent Garden, so actually not too far away from where Benjamin Franklin House is today. The anatomy school seemed to have been successful. As Polly writes, lectures go on briskly. A fresh pupil today who makes up half the 100 whose names are entered besides some others who had promised. Now, 50 students is actually quite good for a budding anatomy school. So, and this anatomy school actually allowed William Hewson to continue his groundbreaking work, such as plotting the human lymphatic system, for which he used turtles and mercury to demonstrate. This won him the Copley Medal, which was the highest medal you could achieve for scientific experiments and work. And actually, Benjamin Franklin House, when we were being restored in the 1990s, we actually found the remnants of the anatomy school in the basement, which used to be the garden. And we did find a mixture of human and animal remains, including some turtles with some mercury remains on it. So this kind of keeps with the narrative of the anatomy school in the basement. Sadly, being an anatomist was dangerous in the 18th century, and William Hewson died of sepsis in 1774, leaving behind Polly and their 3 children. And this was a very dark time in Polly's life, especially since she was pregnant with her 3rd child at the time. She then turned to Franklin as her protector and father figure to help her get through this time. And there were many exchanges between the 2 of them where they lament this unfortunate passing. So he really was a support for her during kind of probably one of the worst times of her life. So I think that it's fair to say that he really was such a looming figure in her life in more ways than one. Now, Benjamin Franklin leaves Craven Street in 1775 and returns to Philadelphia to help draft the Declaration of Independence. Polly continues to correspond with Franklin, where she asks for his advice and updates him on his London friends. She writes, "My letters are a kind of private newspaper. I give the articles just as they happen to occur, without regard to order or connection. I fancy this kind will be the most pleasing to you, as it will not require an answer, and will make you feel somewhat like having your English friends about you." Sadly, it wouldn't be until nearly a decade later that they would actually see each other again. This is why these letters reveal many things about both their lives and the world they live in, as this was their main form of communication. And we were actually very lucky that a lot of the correspondence actually survives, not just letters from Franklin to Polly and Polly to Franklin, but a mixture of the 2 for full-on conversation. So we're quite lucky from a historical perspective that we have those kind of interactions. But now I want to talk a little bit more about what these letters reveal specifically about Polly and her relationship with Benjamin Franklin. So the first thing to note is that it really reveals her interest in science and learning. This is obviously a print of depicting Benjamin Franklin's famous kite and key experiment, which he did in Philadelphia before he moved to London in 1752. And this has been mythologized several times, but it really what made him an international name. So by the time Benjamin Franklin got to London in 1757, he was already probably one of the most famous Americans that ever lived. So I think that in some ways, Polly was quite fortunate that the person who ended up lodging at her mother's lodging house was this man of science, because she definitely had a keen interest in it. And her letters to Franklin are full of wonder and curiosity about his many experiments in scientific knowledge, showing her aptitude for learning and retaining information, as her questions keep building on the topics that he introduces, more complex each time. She even once sent him a letter in his phonetic alphabet that he created, even though the only source that she had to create this letter was his very own letter sent to her with that same alphabet. So she was able to decipher it and then use that in her own letter back to him. Franklin, realizing her brilliance, became her tutor of sort, offering her advice about how to study and encouraging her reading. In a letter in May 1760, he says, "I would advise you to read with a pen in your hand and enter in a little book short hints of what you find that is curious or that may be useful. For this will be the best method of imprinting such particulars in your memory, where they will be ready either for practice on some future occasion, if they are matters of utility, or at least to adorn and improve your conversation if they are rather points of curiosity." And then she responds to that saying, "I have no firm reliance on your sincerity and regard, that I think if you'd imagine my pursuit of knowledge would be detrimental, you would not have given me any encouragement, but have checked my curiosity, knowing I should have cheerfully submitted to your judgment. This encouragement of the studies of a young woman might have seemed odd in that time period, especially for a man like Benjamin Franklin. But as many writings suggest, that as the cause for American independence reached its peak, and so did the Enlightenment period, he began to realize the importance of equality for all, including the education of women. It could be argued that Polly could have been his first case study in this regard. She was also exposed to Franklin's circle of learned friends, who often came to call at the house, such as Joseph Priestley, Thomas Paine, and John Pringle, to talk about matters of science, diplomacy, philosophy. And in fact, as Franklin was so close to the landlady and her family, he was allowed to use the family's front parlor to have those meetings to talk about these various topics. Now, we don't have any evidence of this, but it's not unfair to think that maybe Polly may have been privy to some of those conversations, especially if she was interested in those topics. And she would have learned a lot from those interactions and probably would have enjoyed it very much. When Franklin was sent to Europe again as ambassador to France in 1777, the tone of Polly's letters began to change. It was clear that the war was causing tension that could be felt in London and everywhere else. In a series of letters where it seems that, that certain ones are being detained and not being passed on to Benjamin Franklin and to Polly and vice versa, during the War of Independence, Polly writes, "Why our letters should be detained, I cannot see. For I am sure that I can give you no political intelligence, and as no purpose would be answered by yours giving it to me. I am equally sure that you would write nothing to me that has at least allusion to public affairs." And I think that that quote is very much showing how astute she is and how she realizes that that if they were to detain their letters, it would obviously be potentially to stop any kind of espionage happening, because anybody who was prominent American figure probably would have been a suspicious person to write to. And in a letter in 1779, she also says, "You and I can never meet on this side of the grave, for I do not expect such a settlement of public affairs as shall bring you hither, or make it eligible for me to carry my family to America." Now, this is foreshadowing of the highest order, as Polly would eventually move to Philadelphia to live near Franklin, but only after the war. But these passages highlight the general malaise that was felt during the war. In fact, it is clear from her letters that Polly was worried about what the war might bring and was scared to join Franklin in France or America during this time of uncertainty, which I think is perfectly understandable in a time of war. When war finally ended, she rejoiced in a letter to Franklin in 1783, saying, "At length we are in peace, God be praised, and long, very long may it continue. All wars are follies, very expensive and very mischievous ones. When will mankind be convinced of this and agree to settle their differences by arbitration? Were they to do it even by the cast of a die, it would be better than by fighting and destroying each other." Franklin had similar thoughts right up until he left London in 1775, trying to find an amicable solution to the unrest in the colonies. But as we all know, this was ultimately unsuccessful. But for a very long time, when Franklin was in London, he was hoping to come up with a similar Commonwealth agreement that Canada ended up having. After the war ended, Polly would eventually visit him when he was in France in 1784, much to the delight of Franklin, who enjoyed being around her 3 children. He was fond of children and encouraged them to be spoiled, while many of his own children and grandchildren were quite far away. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Polly as a sort of modern woman. And the reason why I put modern in quote is that she is very much a woman of her time, but we can see from her letters to Franklin how she really subverted the norms of the period as well. For example, in a letter she writes about her daughter, she says, "Contrary to fashion and consequently to the opinion of most people, you know, in some points I'm very obstinate. I keep her without stays, by which mean her shape retains its natural grace, being unconfined and her motions free. Her health too is preserved." Stays are a type of women undergarment, which is like a corset. By letting her daughter be free of this type of garment, she is making a statement about the social rules of the period. She also wrote how she wanted her daughter to be clever and go to school. These would have seemed radical at a time, especially for a middle-class home like Polly came from, or a merchant class home that Polly came from. I would again claim that if life had been different, that she would have pursued a career in science or philosophy. Although there were female scientists at the time, such as Caroline Herschel, who was an astronomer, and Genevieve Charlotte d'Arconville, who was an anatomist in France, this may have not been a respectable pursuit of her, especially as a widowed mother of 3 children that needed to support her children. So what would have allowed her to be so independently minded? Perhaps she was inspired by her own tutoring from Benjamin Franklin. Although she was a young widow, she seemed to always find a way to stay independent and never remarried. This would have allowed her some measure of freedom within society. She also received an inheritance from her aunt, which would have given her the financial independence, but also the freedom to move to America as soon as her affairs were in order. Now, Polly then, again, at this point in Polly's life, she was a widow and her mother had sadly passed away. Franklin had for many years told her that America was a land of opportunity where her family could thrive, find a good education, and ultimately get good employment. And that she would even find a suitable husband for her daughter, Elizabeth, a common topic of conversation in their letters. In fact, there's quite an amusing correspondence between Benjamin Franklin and Polly, where he suggests that his grandson, William Temple Franklin, should be paired with her daughter, Eliza, to which apparently Temple said that she was too young for him. To put this in context, Elizabeth Hewson was pretty much a baby at this point, so I can understand why that might be an issue. So she did leave London and moved in late 1786. Franklin lent her some money, about $183 to get her settled, and she makes a home for herself and her children in Philadelphia. It is said that as Benjamin Franklin was dying in 1790, Polly read to him from Dr. Johnson's Lives of the Poets and was there with him on his deathbed. Polly would pass away on the 14th of October, 1795, age 56, and her children remained in Pennsylvania after this time. Her eldest, William Jr., obtained some land and became a farmer. Thomas became a doctor after his father, William Sr., and Elizabeth married an American, which I'm sure Benjamin Franklin was very pleased about, if he knew. In fact, the Hewson family still lives in America to this day, and legend has it, and if there's anybody who's watching today who's actually from the Hewson family that could confirm this, that would be great, but supposedly there is a doctor in every generation of the family. So it'd be great to know if anybody can confirm or deny that. So, but this proves the lasting connection through the generations. So much so that the Hewson family were actually present at the opening of Benjamin Franklin House as a museum on the 300th birthday of Benjamin Franklin in 2006, which truly, I think, shows the deep connection that Polly really instilled in the family for that love and that connection in that house. Now, I just want to end this talk a little bit about how Polly fits within us at Benjamin Franklin House. Oh, this is actually a portrait of Thomas Tickle Hewson, who is Polly's son, who became a doctor. He actually was involved in the University of Pennsylvania as well. So again, that continued connection to Benjamin Franklin in that family. So for those of you who haven't visited Benjamin Franklin House, Polly is the protagonist of our historical experience as she guides visitors through the 18th century spaces, but we're using 21st century technology to help tell the story of Benjamin Franklin's life in London. For example, as you can see, there are projections on the walls there, and we do have sounds coming that Polly interacts with from the different people in Franklin's circle. Her curiosity and confidence really drives the narrative of Franklin's tumultuous time in London in the lead up to the War of Independence. In the show, we try to highlight their friendship and how it affects both of their lives. We think that Benjamin Franklin would have approved of our historical experience. He once said that he was born too soon, as he would have liked to see how scientific discoveries had developed over time. And I always use this example for visitors to the house, but if you think about it, there's about over 100 years from when Benjamin Franklin first did his experiments with lightning to when the first light bulb was invented. So he really did, there was a really big gap between that. So he probably would have enjoyed knowing this. Now, but what would Polly have thought? That's the real question. We'd like to think that she also would have approved. Often overshadowed by the more prominent men in her circle, she is finally a protagonist in the story, and her name will always be known in relation to her dear preceptor, Benjamin Franklin. Thank you, and I will take any questions anybody may have.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. And thank you everyone for joining. I can see in the Q&A already that someone's asked about a link to the Franklin papers, so I can we can get that to post in the chat as well. But do type either in the chat or in the Q&A if you have any questions you'd like to ask Caitlin. In the meantime, I had a question to start with. Firstly, it was so lovely. I know you gave a kind of warning about the quotes, but it really was a lovely way to get a sense of their close relationship and the kind of warmth with which they spoke. Yeah, so I just wondered if there were other things that you gleaned from looking at those letters, perhaps maybe about her meeting with William Hewson, and maybe from we saw Franklin's response, but from the letter that she wrote to him, did you learn a bit more about how that happened?
That's a good question. Well, so she wrote specifically about how she had met kind of a handsome man who was a physician, and that he had proposed to her. So I think in some ways she was just giving Benjamin Franklin the highlights, but was explaining her kind of feelings about him, which I think is very kind of interesting about their relationship, is that although they bonded over these like scientific ideas, she did really share kind of her heart with him and how she was feeling. And so I think that you can feel that warmth that he's sending her back in that way.
I thought that last line about her happiness and sort of the link that would lead to his happiness was particularly.
And in a letter that he sent, Benjamin Franklin sent her after she got married, he said that he loves anybody who loves her, which is very sweet. So
yeah, that's lovely. We have had a few questions come in now. So first of all, from Donna Corbett, they say, please tell us more about the tour. Is that a mannequin of Polly or a human guide? We're in the US and can only plan our visit.
Well, thank you for asking. So no, it's an actual actress. So I'm sorry, no, Polly Hewson herself takes you from room to room. So it is a museum as theater approach. So Polly will take you from room to room and kind of take you back through time and experience the house in that way. So we do hope to see you. You get to be in historic spaces, but you get to be kind of told the story from Polly herself.
Thank you. And if you are joining from the US, we are working on, and aren't able to visit yet, we are working on a virtual version of a kind of filmed version of the historical experience as well. So do keep an eye on our website for more news of that coming soon. And so next question from an anonymous attendee is, how long would it have taken for an exchange of letters at the time Polly and Franklin were corresponding?
That is a good question. Well, to give you an idea, it would take 28 days of sea travel to travel from London to Philadelphia, which is partly why Franklin's wife Deborah never came to visit, because it would take a long time. So I'm assuming that if you were riding from London to Philadelphia or vice versa, it would probably take that long. Some of the letters in the correspondence was actually when they were in different parts of the UK. So there were times where Polly was staying with her cousins in the countryside, and so and Franklin was traveling. So those probably would have taken less time. But I'm not sure exactly. Maybe it's interesting though, because his letter about the wedding was sent on the 31st of May, and she got married to William Hewson on the 10th of June. So that probably gives a pretty good estimate of how long the letter would have arrived. I mean, I'm assuming she waited until she received his answer before giving her answer to William, but who knows?
Thanks, Caitlin. Next question from James, who's actually a student competing in placement with us at the moment at Benjamin Franklin House. He's asked, what do you think was Polly's greatest motivation for wanting to move to America?
That's a good question. I think she had a very strong bond with Benjamin Franklin, and I think ultimately that's what led her to that. There were several correspondence that she wrote to him asking about what she should do with her children and how she should educate them. And so I think that she was swayed by the many times that Benjamin Franklin said that they should come to America, that there are loads of opportunities. And at that point, she hadn't gone before because the war was still happening, and she felt unsafe traveling during that time. But also her mother, Margaret passed away shortly before she moved. So I think that was also the motivation, where I can imagine that with her mother having passed away, she didn't have any kind of real ties to the house, to where they were living anymore. And so she moved with her family. And ultimately, I think that was probably the right decision for them, because as I said, the family thrived over there, I believe. So it was a good decision in the end.
Thank you. And the next question is whether there's any information about Franklin, Polly, or other musical activities at Craven Street during Franklin's time of residence.
Sorry, any type of what?
Musical activities.
Musical activities, okay. Well, so when Benjamin Franklin was living in London, he invented an instrument called the glass harmonica, which is, if you know the glass bowls where you do the sound along the rim of the glass and it makes a sound. He made a piano version of that, which is called the glass harmonica, which is 36 glass bowls that are stuck on top of each other. And he actually invented it while he was living in this house in 1761. So I imagine that he would have played it while he was living in the house as well, because he had a glass blower make it specifically for him. In the Georgian period, it was quite common to have, if you had like a party, well, what the equivalent of a party back then, you would probably have music. If you were a young woman, you were expected to learn how to play certain instruments if you were from a certain part of society. So Polly probably would have practiced some sort of instrument. Yes, and of course, people went to concerts in the theater. So there was quite a lot of music in 18th century London in general. Unfortunately, we don't know for sure, except for the glass harmonica, we don't really know for sure what musical instruments were in the house at the time.
Thank you. And then Catherine has asked, where did Polly meet Dr. Hewson? At a social event?
Yes, I believe so. It's interesting because there isn't much details about exactly how they met, but again, it was very much more about the feeling. And I'm assuming because he was also a member of the Royal Society, which wasn't too far away from here as well, that maybe there was some sort of, and also once Benjamin Franklin left Craven Street or was doing his travels, Polly was actually very much acquainted with his circle of friends. So it wouldn't be unfair to say that maybe through some sort of social gathering, she would have met him through kind of the scientists and the kind of the people in the medical field who would have had some connection to Franklin's circle.
And Catherine also asked, did Polly interact with Franklin's wife and daughter in Philadelphia? Do we know much more about their interactions or relationship?
That's a really good question. In the letters that we have that are available on the Franklin Papers website, unfortunately, there isn't much detail, but we do know that her mother, Margaret Stevenson, often corresponded with Deborah while they were living in London. So I know that also in the letters, Polly mentions the Bache family specifically. So I think she must have had some connection, some interaction with at least Sally, Franklin's daughter's husband's family, because she mentions, oh, I've passed on my compliments to the Baches from you. I stayed with the Baches on my way to this place. So so there obviously was some connection. And I'm assuming, considering how close she was to Benjamin Franklin, that when she did move to Philadelphia, there would have been some interaction. But unfortunately, that's lost to time. It would be great to kind of know what that relationship was as well.
Thank you. And that kind of links you mentioning Margaret, Polly's mother, and Chris, who's one of our volunteers, it's great to see you joining, has asked, do we know more about Polly's relationship with Margaret, with her mother?
Yes, well, it seems to have been a loving relationship. Especially towards the end of her life, Polly writes a lot about her mother and mostly about her health, because Benjamin Franklin kind of asks after that. But I get the feeling that, considering, Polly's father passed away when she was reasonably young, that at Margaret as being kind of the main kind of parental figure in her life before Benjamin Franklin, that they had a pretty strong bond. And also, she was very open to Polly, learning about things. There's no evidence of her ever saying, that she shouldn't be learning these things about science and interacting with Franklin. And she really enjoyed having lots of learning and learned people around her. So I think in some ways she was encouraging her daughter to kind of explore things. But again, there isn't much in terms of their exact relationship, except that she often, in her letters to Franklin, often says, I pass my regards for my mother. My mother's upset that you didn't write her directly, that you wrote to her through me, that sort of thing. So and probably a typical mother-daughter relationship. It all has ups and downs.
Thank you. And another question from James: do we know if Franklin had a strong relationship with William Hewson? Do we know anything about their interactions?
Well, we know that he thought highly of him from the way that he spoke about him through the paper, through the letters to Polly about him. And then when he passed away, he's sadly and really suddenly, he sent a letter to his wife Deborah, basically, lamenting his passing and saying that he was a fine young man and that this was a really hard time for the Stevenson-Hewson family. And as he was also a man of science, there is no direct evidence of this. But we suspect that because Benjamin Franklin was also a man of science, that he would have at least been interested in the anatomy school. Whether or not he actually kind of participated in it is another, we have no proof of that. But considering that they were both in the same house at one point, it would make sense that they would have some sort of even like professional interest in each other's work.
Yeah, no, but kind of on that more professional level, I know that Franklin helped William Hewson to become a member of the Royal Society, the kind of predominant science organisation in London, in the UK at the time, still existing today. And he would then go on to receive the Copley Medal for his work on the lymphatic system. So I'm sure that Franklin was instrumental in kind of creating connections for him and furthering his career as well. And then lastly, we have a comment from Sherry, who says, I saw a documentary a few years ago about the family. I'm not sure if they've had a doctor in each generation, but I distinctly remember that for the first time, a daughter in the current generation has become a doctor. She's the first to do so.
That's great news. I'm sure Polly would be very happy if she were with us today of that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for all your questions. Do let us know if there are any outstanding questions. I'm just realizing that I won't be able to share the link within the webinar, but we can send an email to everyone who attended with the link to the Franklin papers in case you'd like to look at those letters further. And great to see people joining from Texas and Long Island. And thank you again for your kind comments as well. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for the fascinating talk.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.